Hey guys, tonight we dive into the velvet-draped corridors of Buckingham Palace, where gas lamps flicker, corsets pinch too tight, and the entire British Empire is about to be ruled by an 18-year-old girl. That's right, you. One minute, you're doodling in your diary and dodging your overbearing mother, and the next, you're being handed a crown heavier than your own head. Literally. Your name is Victoria, and no pressure, but the entire Victorian era? Yeah, it's going to be named after you. You probably won't survive this, but don't worry. It's bedtime storytelling, not a history final. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time it is where you're watching this. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in 1819, technically a princess, but barely clinging to the royal line. Your father, the Duke of Kent, dies before your first birthday, and suddenly your German mother is gripping your destiny with both hands like a particularly stubborn teapot. She sets up a system called the Kensington system. Sounds fancy, but it's basically helicopter parenting before helicopters existed. You're isolated, monitored, and manipulated. No sleepovers, no friends, no fun. You don't even get to walk downstairs alone, but you're clever, observant, and just a bit rebellious. You keep diaries, endless diaries. When you write, it's like exhaling secrets. You know you're different, not just royal, resilient. And then, one gray June morning in 1837, everything changes. Your uncle, King William IV, dies without a legitimate heir, and suddenly you, tiny, untested, quietly stubborn Victoria, are Queen of the United Kingdom. The news wakes you before dawn. They don't even knock. Lord Conyngham and the Archbishop of Canterbury march straight into your room. You're in a nightgown. It's awkward. It's history. You rise, calmly, no tears, no screaming, just this quiet, firm acknowledgement that the world has shifted. You're Queen, 18 years old. You sign your name Victoria R. for the first time. You move into Buckingham Palace, which is still kind of under construction and, fun fact, smells vaguely of wet paint and horse sweat. But it's yours now. The draperies are too heavy. The halls echo weirdly, but it's yours. Your first weeks are a blur of protocol and posture lessons. You're expected to meet prime ministers and speak with confidence, but your voice still squeaks when you're nervous. You also have to avoid showing favoritism, unless it's toward your dog, Dash, who wears his own tiny coat and is arguably more emotionally supportive than any member of Parliament. There's Lord Melbourne, your first Prime Minister. He's charming, fatherly, possibly a little flirty, and way too influential over you, at least in the eyes of your advisors. You trust him. You hang on his every word. Some say he's grooming you politically. Others whisper worse. Historians still argue whether your relationship with Melbourne was purely mentorship, or if there was a deeper, possibly romantic connection bubbling beneath the lace collars and courtly etiquette. Still, with Melbourne by your side, you begin to make decisions, real ones. You refuse to hand over power to your mother. You make your own appointments. You learn to read people, dodge political traps, and smile graciously while silently calculating your next move. The public is fascinated by you. A young queen. How novel. Some adore you instantly. Others are suspicious. You're too German, they say. Too emotional. Too unmarried. Cartoons mock your mother Songs parody your inexperience, but you endure. You stand, tiny and poised, in heavy satin, under chandeliers that drip like icicles. You attend balls and barely dance. Not yet. Not until you meet him. He arrives in 1839. Albert, your cousin from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which sounds like a made-up fantasy realm, but is, in fact, a very real duchy. He's proper, intellectual, and handsome, in a broody, poet-reading sort of way. You expect nothing. And then he bows, and something shifts. You don't flirt, you propose. Yes, you, the queen. You have to. He can't propose to the sovereign after all. You ask, he accepts. And just like that, your quiet, lonely reign begins to hum with the rhythm of something new. But not yet. The wedding's coming. The drama, the children, the grief. Tonight, you're just beginning. Barely crowned, barely grown, barely ready. But you stand anyway. Your empire awaits. You're married now. Well, almost. It's 1840, and your wedding day approaches like a parade float made of lace and state protocol. Everyone's watching. Some are cheering. Some are grumbling into their tea. You're still Queen Victoria, ruler of an empire, but now you're also a young bride planning a royal wedding with more embroidery than sense. The ceremony takes place at St. James's Palace, and you wear white. Not ivory, not cream. Pure white, which, believe it or not, is a bit scandalous. White dresses aren't fashionable yet. You're the one who makes them a thing. That's right. Wedding dresses weren't always white. But after today, the whole world starts copying your choice. And bridal shops everywhere silently thank you. Albert wears a military uniform, handsome, serious, slightly overwhelmed. The ceremony is formal, lovely, slightly nerve-wracking. You forget a few lines. Your voice trembles. But the world melts into the sound of the choir, the shimmer of candlelight, and the hush of history holding its breath. Then married life begins, sort of. Because here's the thing, they don't exactly know what to do with Albert. You're the queen. He's the husband of the queen, not a king, not a co-ruler, just the consort. A glorified +1 with amazing cheekbones. And he hates it. Albert isn't content to just smile at events and open flower shows. He wants purpose, influence, respect. At first, he's frozen out of politics and excluded from cabinet meetings. You want to protect him, shield him from the poisonous world of court intrigue. But he's not some porcelain doll. He's ambitious, smart. He wants in. You resist. There are arguments, long late-night ones. He paces. You write in your diary. Eventually, though, you begin to shift. You realize Albert could be more than a husband. He could be a partner. And slowly, sometimes stubbornly, you let him into your world. Together, you begin to redefine what a royal marriage can look like. You're equals. Well, almost. You still remind him occasionally that you outrank him. With a wink. Your household grows. You're soon pregnant, which, let's be real, you're not thrilled about. You find pregnancy uncomfortable, undignified, and, your words, an occupational hazard of being married. But you endure. Your first daughter, also named Victoria, because why make naming easy, is born in 1840. Albert is enchanted. You're more practical. You're not a naturally maternal person, and you admit that. But you love fiercely. You just show it differently. Less cuddles, more control. The children keep coming. Edward, your heir, Alice, Alfred, Helena, Louise, Arthur, Leopold, and Beatrice, 9 in total. Your family expands faster than a Victorian bookshelf. Meanwhile, Albert steps up. He handles more state duties. He advises on policy. He reforms royal finances. He even runs your household with the precision of a Swiss watch. You might rule an empire, but Albert manages your daily life like a very elegant spreadsheet. You attend events together, balls, state dinners, public appearances, and become the image of domestic royalty. The press eats it up. The ideal family, they call you, a monarchy that feels relatable. Just your average superpower couple with 9 kids and colonial dominion over half the globe. But not everything is lace and roses. Albert's health isn't perfect. He works too much, worries constantly, and is often sickly. He's also a perfectionist, and he drives himself into exhaustion over every detail, from sewage reform to your children's tutors. And you're changing too. Your style hardens. You're less the young girl from Kensington, more the monarch of myth. You grow into your crown like it's a second spine. Dignified, stern, almost untouchable. The sweet girl in the white dress fades into the shadow of a queen sculpted by expectation. Still, there are soft moments, private ones, letters exchanged, quiet walks, musical evenings where you play piano and Albert sings German Lieder. He sketches, you paint, you garden, you talk about the future. But your world isn't just private, it's political. The 1840s are turbulent. There are revolutions sweeping Europe, hunger riots in your cities, and pressure from Parliament to expand democracy. You're wary of change. Albert, on the other hand, is fascinated by reform. He pushes for public education, sanitation, science. You clash over these things. He calls you too conservative. You say he's too idealistic. But you compromise. And slowly, the monarchy becomes not just a symbol of power, but of progress, thanks to both of you. Historians still argue whether Albert ever truly felt equal to you. Some say he remained quietly resentful, always slightly in your shadow. Others claim he preferred the behind-the-scenes role, sculpting policy while you wore the crown. Either way, your partnership redefines the monarchy, and you both know it. Then, in 1851, Albert launches the Great Exhibition, a glittering display of innovation housed inside a giant glass palace in Hyde Park. The Crystal Palace. It's a marvel, a monument to progress, and a love letter to his belief in humanity's potential. You're proud, and maybe a little surprised. Albert, the boy who once shuffled awkwardly through court, now dazzles the world with glass and steel. The people adore him. Finally, as the exhibition closes, you both sit in the twilight of a long summer evening, watching lamplight shimmer through the Crystal Palace. You lean into his shoulder, tired, triumphant. This is your golden era, for now. It's 1852, and for the first time in years, you breathe without anxiety, humming behind your ribs. The children are growing, loud, unruly, opinionated, but growing. Albert is respected, even admired. Your reign feels stable, structured, almost domestic in its rhythm. Morning papers, court meetings, letters, dinners, repeat. And yet, there's always noise under the surface. Albert is restless again. He's reading about sanitary reform and urban overcrowding like they're murder mysteries. He wants the monarchy to matter, not just in symbolism, but in actual useful policy. You admire him for it, even when you secretly wish he'd take a nap. Meanwhile, you keep having children. It's like clockwork. Baby, brief break, another baby. Your body aches. You complain, not just to Albert, but in your diaries. Pregnancy, you write, is an ordeal. Not exactly the sentiment embroidered onto baby blankets, but you endure it again and again because producing heirs is a duty, not a preference. There's Edward, your heir, and you're not thrilled. He's charming but lazy. You find him frustrating. You write that he's self-indulgent and difficult to manage. Albert agrees. Together, you decide he needs discipline, a firm hand, rigorous education, moral instruction. The poor boy ends up with a childhood more like a royal boot camp. He'll never quite forgive it. Still, the court flourishes. Balls glitter under gaslight. Your daughters play harp in salons. The court artists capture your growing family in paintings that make everything look far more serene than it feels. Behind the scenes, there's bickering, scandals, minor illnesses, and at least one incident involving a flaming pudding. Albert tries to impose German efficiency on British court life. It goes unevenly. Servants bristle. Nobles roll their eyes. You step in, smoothing feathers and translating Albert's perfectionism into something more palatable. But he's wearing thin. You see it in his eyes, in the way he pinches the bridge of his nose when reading late into the night, or how he drifts into silences longer than usual. His workload is crushing. You urge him to slow down. He doesn't listen. Then, in December 1861, everything tilts. Albert falls ill. It begins like a cold, a chill, a fever, some fatigue. He insists it's nothing, but it lingers, deepens. The doctors are vague. Some say it's typhoid. Others suspect Crohn's disease or stomach cancer. Historians still argue about the true cause. All you know is this: he gets worse. You sit beside him, hour after hour, watching the life drain from him like twilight leaking through curtains. His breathing slows. His voice fades. He holds your hand, and then he lets go. You are 42, a widow, a queen still, but now hollowed. You do not attend the funeral. You dress in black. You will stay in black for the rest of your life. The court shrouds itself in mourning. Mirrors are covered. Clocks are stopped. You retreat, not just from public view, but from the world. You vanish into grief like a house into fog. You move to Windsor, then Balmoral, then Osborne House. Quiet, remote places where Albert once smiled and walked and argued about drainage systems. You clutch at memories, reread his letters, refuse to change a thing in his rooms. The people begin to murmur, "Where is the Queen? Why has she disappeared? Why won't she show her face?" You don't care. You don't feel like a monarch anymore. You feel like a wife left behind. You still rule, technically. Papers cross your desk. You sign. You approve. But your ministers grow frustrated. The public grows restless. The monarchy begins to feel distant, irrelevant. And you? You grow superstitious. You believe Albert still guides you. You feel his presence. You talk to him. At night, in writing, sometimes out loud. They say you're mad. They whisper about seances, mediums, ghosts in black crinoline. But grief is not madness. It's devotion in a darker suit. And still, the world moves. The Industrial Revolution surges forward. Trains shriek. Telegraphs buzz. Empires expand. Colonies rise and tremble. And you remain, silent, black-draped, half-shadowed behind palace walls. Until one day, someone unexpected walks into your solitude. He's rugged, Scottish. A servant, technically. John Brown. Loyal, blunt, absolutely unconcerned with courtly flattery. He calls you woman instead of ma'am more than once. And you don't hate it. You ride horses again. You breathe air that doesn't taste like dust and regret. You begin just barely to live. The court is scandalized. They call him the Queen's Highland servant. Rumors fly. Are you in love? Is it romantic? Is it something darker? Historians still argue. But you know this. He makes you laugh again. And in your silence, that laughter is everything. The years after Albert's death stretch like an overlong veil, heavy, trailing behind you, snagging on memories. You no longer host balls. You no longer attend Parliament in person. You sign your name with less flourish, eat with less appetite, sleep only because the body insists. But the monarchy doesn't pause, even when your heart begs it to. And so you adapt, sort of. You become a widow queen dressed always in mourning black. Your jewelry is jet. Your demeanor is iron. Court life dims into whispered protocol and echoes of happier noise. The hallways of Windsor feel too wide, Osborne House too quiet, Balmoral too full of shadows. Yet the children keep multiplying, not just growing, but marrying. One by one they slip away into foreign courts, leaving behind wedding gifts and language lessons and occasionally a very loud child. You become a grandmother almost before you feel like you've finished being a mother. But you're still mothering, kind of, by letter, by dictate, by heavy opinion. Victoria, your eldest daughter, marries into Germany and eventually becomes the Empress of Prussia. A sharp mind, very much her father's child. She argues with you often, especially about politics. Then there's Bertie, your heir. Still frustrating, still too fond of cards and ladies and the sound of his own voice. You never quite approve of him. You watch him like a hawk watches an especially reckless squirrel. There are others. Alice, who embraces medicine and dies too young. Alfred, naval and dramatic. Helena, dutiful and mostly ignored. Louise, artistic and scandalous. Arthur, military to the bone. Leopold, hemophiliac and heartbreakingly fragile. Beatrice, your baby, quiet, loyal, and destined to stay by your side far longer than she wants. You keep your children close even when they're half a continent away. Through your letters, your expectations, your rules, you arrange their marriages like diplomatic chess moves. Every pawn a potential treaty, every bishop a royal alliance. You are building something, an empire of bloodlines. You dream of peace through family. But peace is slippery, and family, well, family has its own ideas. The world outside continues to rumble. The 1860s and 70s bring more than just lace-trimmed christenings and Baroque telegrams. There's unrest in Ireland, revolts in India, wars flickering across Europe. The British press grows bolder, brasher. Your absence from public life becomes a political liability. Prime ministers come and go. Disraeli flatters you into political re-engagement. You find him theatrical, amusing, a bit much, but charming in his own ridiculous way. He calls you Empress before anyone else dares to, and you love that. You begin to reappear, slowly, like the moon after a storm. A rare public ceremony here, a photograph there. The public, long starved of your image, cheers. Your shadowy grief becomes a mystique. Your solitude becomes solemn dignity. You are no longer just their queen. You are their symbol, their national grandmother in black. In 1876, thanks largely to Disraeli's empire-loving flattery, Parliament names you Empress of India. The title sounds foreign on British soil, but it pleases you. It pleases Albert's memory, and it suits the empire's expansionist appetite. And speaking of appetite, Let's talk about those Jubilee years. Because nothing says royal endurance like fireworks, fountains, and at least 3 military parades. Your Golden Jubilee in 1887 is an imperial spectacle. You've reigned for 50 years. You ride through the streets in a gold-trimmed carriage. Crowds scream your name. Your children, now princes, princesses, and awkwardly rigid monarchs in their own rights, return from every corner of Europe to stand beside you. There's food, so much food, beef tongue and blancmange and cakes taller than some of your grandchildren. It's exhausting. You smile through it, mostly. But here's a secret. You're already beginning to feel tired. Your hands ache. Your hearing fades. Your patience, never stellar, wears thin. The faces around you blur sometimes. The letters pile up. Your writing grows shakier. And then comes Abdul Karim, a young Indian servant sent as a ceremonial gift from India. He's meant to serve you desserts. Instead, he becomes your closest companion. You find him fascinating, gentle, respectful. He speaks to you in Urdu. He teaches you phrases, offers cultural tidbits, slips you mangoes from his homeland. You adore him. The court is horrified. They call him manipulative, ambitious, untrustworthy. You call him Munshi, teacher. You give him gifts, titles, a house. You defend him fiercely. It's John Brown all over again, only now with added racism and sharper gossip. Historians still argue whether Abdul Karim truly cared for you or whether he played you for power. But you don't care. He makes you feel alive again, listened to, human. Through all of this, you still attend meetings, still read dispatches, still sign orders. But the weight of the crown feels heavier now, not on your head, but on your bones. You move slower, you blink longer, and when you close your eyes, it's Albert you still see, standing just beyond the candlelight. But you are still queen, still mother, still widow, still monarch of an empire that spans from Canada to Cape Town. And though your world has changed, railroads now pierce the countryside, telephones buzz in offices, electric lights hum faintly in chandeliers, you remain silent, watchful, enduring, always in black. It's the 1880s now, and your name, Victoria, is no longer just a person. It's an adjective, a shorthand, a global brand. Victorian means stiff collars, grand morals, gaslight flickering over cobbled streets, and an empire that seems too big to fail. And you're right in the middle of it, quietly, unbudgingly. You don't walk quickly anymore. Your knees crack. You need help dressing. But your gaze is still sharp, and your expectations sharper. You are the symbol, the matriarch, the fixed star in a spinning sky. But you can't help noticing how odd this new world feels. Your empire keeps expanding. Colonies multiply like dust bunnies under a velvet throne. British India thrives and trembles. Africa is being carved like a roast at a dinner party none of the locals were invited to. The maps you knew as a girl are unrecognizable, and your subjects, scattered across continents, worship you, resent you, misunderstand you, and name train stations after you anyway. Back home, it's not just geography that's changing, it's people, ideas, the very air. You now live in a country with typewriters, with electric street lamps, with suffragettes banging tambourines outside Parliament, shouting that they deserve the vote just as much as your son Bertie does. You don't agree. You rule an empire, yes, but you are no feminist. You believe women have their roles, important, yes, but separate, supportive, dutiful. You find the suffrage movement loud, dangerous, unbecoming. You write scathing letters about it. Say what you want about Albert's spreadsheets, but at least he never marched in a sash screaming for voting reform. And yet, despite your resistance, you've become a reluctant icon to some feminists. Because here you are, a woman ruling without apology, commanding ministers, outlasting kings. They make posters with your silhouette. They shout your name. It's a bit ironic. Historians still argue whether your reign helped or hurt the early feminist cause. You never intended to be a symbol for them, but that's the thing about symbols. They aren't always up to you. Your court grows quieter as your children become rulers in their own right. Victoria in Germany. Bertie, still not king, but definitely hosting questionable dinner parties. Louise stirs up gossip by befriending artists. Beatrice, loyal as ever, still reads your letters aloud to you each evening. You watch it all like a stage play, part amused, part resigned. And then, in 1887, your golden jubilee marks 50 years on the throne. You barely recognize yourself in the commemorative portraits. You are not the girl in the coronation gown anymore. You are solid, regal, tired. And yet the country rejoices. London bursts into banners. There are parades, choirs, river flotillas. Queens and kings and dignitaries from every corner of the empire gather under one dripping gray sky. You wave. You smile, faintly. You nod like a figurehead carved in wax. They cheer wildly anyway. It's all overwhelming, especially when you'd rather be home at Osborne, drinking tea and rereading Albert's old letters. Still, you give speeches. You bless cannons. You wear the crown, heavy, dazzling, the size of a teapot. You sit through dinners that last 3 hours and feel like 17. And you realize something odd. You've outlived most of your critics. The politicians who called you too young, too German, too sentimental, gone, replaced by younger ones who write you more politely. The newspapers that once mocked your morning dress now praise your endurance. You have become tradition, like roast beef, or the Thames, or bad weather. The world sees you as the stable core of the empire, unmoving, eternal. But you know better. You've changed. You just did it slowly enough no one noticed. And then, in 1897, the Diamond Jubilee arrives. 60 years on the throne. This time, the celebration is global. Telegrams buzz from Australia to Africa. Ships fire cannons. Troops march. Children sing. You ride in a carriage drawn by white horses, your tiny frame draped in layers of black lace and orders of chivalry. There's a moment, just one, when the procession halts, and all you hear is silence. Millions watching, waiting, and you, barely able to lift your gloved hand, give the faintest nod. They erupt. But inside, you're somewhere else. You're thinking about that girl in Kensington, forbidden to walk down the stairs alone. You're thinking about Albert, watching you from a velvet chair, correcting a minister's memo with his lips pursed. You're thinking about the empire, not as maps, not as colonies, but as people. So many people, and wondering how many truly understand you. That night, you sit in bed, aching, blinking against candlelight. Abdul brings you a small mango. You thank him in Urdu. The air smells of flowers and coal smoke and distant rain, and as sleep pulls you down, you murmur something that surprises even you. I did try. You wake now to bird song at Osborne House, but it's not the vibrant clamor of youth. It's softer, the fluttery kind that feels like it might break if you listen too hard. Your joints creak. Your breath comes shorter. Your handwriting has shrunk, but your to-do list never has. You are in your 80s. Most people don't get here. Queens especially. You've survived childbirth, assassination attempts, revolutions, countless political crises, and at least 3 fashion eras marked by truly awful sleeves. And yet here you are, still queen, still stubborn, still wrapped in black silk like grief is a second skin. The truth is, the world has changed so much around you, it's almost unrecognizable. Steamships are being replaced by motor cars. The first wireless radio messages are zipping through the atmosphere like ghosts learning Morse code. There are moving pictures now. You've seen one. Grainy, flickering, oddly mesmerizing. It looks like magic, pretending to be science. You blink at photographs of your great-grandchildren and can't keep their names straight. One of them has your nose. Another already bosses his tutors like a monarch in miniature. You're not surprised. Even your empire hums differently. The civilizing mission they once whispered about has grown louder, more ruthless, more complicated. You've watched British soldiers die in Africa, watched Indian rebellions rise and fall, watched the sun rise on one colony, then set on another. And you've grown less naive. You once saw your empire as noble, enlightened. Now you see the contradictions. You are Empress of India, but you never set foot there. You hold dominion over millions whose names you'll never know, whose customs are reduced to ceremonial fans and exotic silks brought in for court banquets. Abdul tries to explain more. Sometimes you listen. Sometimes it's too much. Historians still argue how much you truly understood colonialism, how much of it you condoned, how much you tolerated, how much you questioned when no one was looking. But what no one doubts is this: your presence helped shape the myth of it. Your name is carved on gates in Hong Kong, etched on bridges in Canada, stamped on tea tins, textbooks, rifles. Victoria Regina has become a symbol of power, yes, but also of weight, of something heavy pressing on distant lands. And yet the British love you. You are their constant. Through crises and coronations, through war scares and factory fires, you've been there, a black-clad figure in the margins of their lives. And then there's your family web, now comically sprawling. Bertie, your heir, finally behaves like a statesman, sort of. He still smokes too much, but he's learned to conceal his excesses behind the right speeches. You still don't quite trust him, but you've resigned yourself to him. Your daughters rule or advise from thrones across Europe. Your granddaughters marry into Russia, Spain, Denmark. Your bloodline trickles into almost every major royal family on the continent. You're not just a queen anymore. You're the matriarch of Europe, the grandmother of Europe, they call you, sometimes fondly, sometimes nervously, because your grandchildren don't always get along. They form alliances and smile for portraits, but underneath there are rivalries, suspicions. You sense it, especially with Wilhelm, Kaiser Wilhelm, the German emperor, your grandson, proud, volatile, obsessed with proving himself. He writes you long letters, sometimes charming, sometimes unsettling. You wonder if this generation, these glittering heirs in jeweled uniforms, understands what peace costs. Sometimes, in the quiet hours at Osborne, you reread Albert's writings, his dreams for international unity, for moral diplomacy, for advancement through science. You touch the edges of his sketches, still crisp, and wonder what he'd make of this tangled world now straining under its own weight. There are celebrations still, anniversaries, more portraits, more gifts, many of which you don't open. You sit in your chair like a ship in harbor, grandchildren kiss your gloved hand, ministers bow, Abdul brings tea. But inside you're already preparing. You've outlived your beloved husband by 4 decades, outlived several children, outlived almost everyone who knew you as anything other than a marble bust. You write letters to be opened after your death. You instruct your staff about your burial, next to Albert, of course. In the mausoleum you designed, you even planned the garments, white, not black. A last break from mourning. You're tired, not in a theatrical way, not in a tragic doomed queen sense, just tired the way mountains are tired, eroded slowly by time. Your appetite shrinks. Your walks shorten. You forget minor things. Sometimes, as you drift into sleep, you hear your name spoken in Albert's voice. And still, your people adore you. Children carry tiny Union Jacks to wave at your carriage, even when your hand can barely lift to wave back. School children memorize dates you lived. Shopkeepers name marmalades and teacups after you. The newspapers begin referring to you in the past tense, quietly, just in case. You don't mind. You've already lived longer than most monarchs, and far longer than anyone expected when you first stood trembling in your nightgown that early June morning. You think of that girl often. She'd never have imagined this. Not the throne, not the empire, not the sorrow, not the strength, and certainly not the mangoes. You smile, just a little. The turn of the century creeps closer, a slow-moving carriage draped in fog and expectation. It's the 1890s now, and while newspapers speculate about the 20th century with wild-eyed optimism, flying machines, artificial light, cities without horses. You sit in Osborne House, sipping lukewarm tea, wondering how much of it you'll actually see. The truth is, your body's catching up to your crown. Your eyesight falters in the evenings. Reading becomes a chore, not a comfort. Your legs ache more than they walk. Sometimes, when you rest too long, your limbs forget how to move. But your mind? Still sharp, still cataloging everything. Who visited, who bowed too shallow, who dared to bring you undercooked pheasant. You don't forget. You forgive even less. There's something eerie about outliving most of your world. Friends become names in newspapers. Enemies die quietly. Ladies-in-waiting you once giggled with are now memorial plaques. And John Brown, your blunt, beloved Highland servant, is gone. Died in 1883. Pneumonia, they said, but it felt more like another piece of yourself being packed away and buried. You ordered a statue of him, had it placed discreetly. They removed it after you died. You don't know that part yet, but maybe you suspect it. Then came Abdul, your Indian munshi with his soft Urdu and sincere eyes, fills a silence you thought permanent. You write to him constantly, give him titles, land, a position at court. He's not a servant anymore. He's your teacher, your comfort, and oh, does it stir a storm. The household revolts. Bertie fumes. Ministers glare. They accuse him of arrogance, of overstepping, of influencing your opinions. He is foreign. He is not one of them. You don't care. You've always trusted your instincts, even when they were inconvenient. The court calls him manipulative. The newspapers whisper worse. They say he sneaks you opium, poisons your letters, tries to make you change your will. None of it's true, but scandal sticks like soot. You refuse to send him away. They try to intercept his letters. You write more. Historians still argue what he meant to you. Was it platonic devotion? A deep cross-cultural friendship? A late-life infatuation with something exotic? Something new? There are no definitive answers, only glimpses in the margins of your journals, words inked in uneven loops, translations scrawled in the corners. What matters is this: he made you feel alive, respected, seen, and that was enough. Outside your windows, the empire churns. Africa is being carved again, this time with more rifles. The Boer War rages in South Africa. Young British soldiers die under a sun too hot to forgive them. You read their names, you sign the condolence notes. Your hand trembles slightly as you do. You begin to question things more openly. Colonial officials who once charmed you now seem distant, cold, clumsy. You write a letter of concern about the war, a rare breach of your usual royal silence. The generals ignore it. You know, somewhere deep in your bones, that the world you're leaving is not the one you were born into. And that's a good thing. Mostly, you meet with inventors now, people who bring gadgets and wires and flash bulbs. You let yourself be photographed more. The flash is always shocking, like being struck by artificial lightning. You blink for minutes afterward, wondering if your retinas have packed up and left the country. You don't love the camera. It flattens you. You're all angles and shadow now. A round face, a black dress, eyes that have seen too much. But you let the photos happen, because symbols need to be seen. There are visits from dignitaries, from Tsar Nicholas II, your grandson. His wife, Alexandra, is also your granddaughter. Yes, it's complicated. No, your family tree does not resemble anything approved by modern genetics. You host them all with dignity, sit like a sculpture, smile at the right intervals. But inside you wonder, will they hold it together when you're gone? Will the piece you tried to stitch together with weddings and treaties and Christmas cards last? Probably not. Your family is a powder keg and lace gloves. Still, there are good days. Beatrice still reads to you. You enjoy Indian curry more than roast beef now. You laugh, sometimes, at court gossip. You watch the grandchildren tumble through the gardens at Osborne like overexcited puppies. You breathe in salt air and think, for the 1000th time, that this place feels more like home than Buckingham ever did. One morning, you try to walk to the window, and your legs simply refuse. You sit down, quietly. Nobody panics, not yet. But you know, this isn't exhaustion, it's withdrawal. The long, slow reeling in of the tide. You dictate more letters. You review your will. You give Abdul a final gift, a portrait of yourself. You sign your name with extra care. And then you ask to be left alone for a bit. The room is quiet. A breeze lifts the corner of a curtain. Somewhere down the hall, a servant hums a tune you don't recognize. Or maybe you do. Maybe it's just been that long. You close your eyes. And for the first time in decades, you don't think about state papers. You think about Albert and strawberries and dancing barefoot as a child in a room no one was supposed to enter. Osborne House grows still. The servants walk quieter now, their shoes like whispers on polished floors. Your family has gathered, not in ceremony, not in parade formation, but in awkward, hushed clusters. They wait, they know. You drift in and out of sleep, not dramatic, not gasping, just slow, like sinking into thick wool, like being folded away. And while they sit, pacing, writing, murmuring, your mind floats back to India. You picture the Ganges, though you've only ever seen it in photographs and paintings. You imagine the mango trees Abdul described, the monsoon slapping against rooftops. You remember his voice reading to you in Hindi, your favorite word, Kushi, happiness, a small, silly joy in a crown-heavy life. Back to Scotland, to Balmoral, where the air always smelled of peat and pine and John Brown's unwashed flannel. You think of the way the mist clung to the highlands like secrets, the way Albert laughed there, rare, sudden, perfect, the way your dogs never minded the rain, even when you did. Back to childhood, a quiet room, a locked door, your mother's perfume like powdered roses and worry. You're alone again, writing in your diary. Age 10, dreaming about someday owning your own slippers, let alone a throne. You miss that girl sometimes. She didn't know what a crown really cost. And then you're back. Sort of. You feel a hand on yours, small, warm. Beatrice, your last child, the one who stayed. She's reading, softly, something from your own journal years ago. You try to squeeze her fingers, but your body is barely listening. Your breathing changes, just slightly. And then, sometime on the evening of January 20, 1901, in a room lined with portraits of the dead and the silent prayers of the living, you leave. The silence afterward is enormous. They close the drapes. They stop the clocks. They place a black ribbon on the doorknob. The era ends. You are no longer Queen Victoria. You are history now. News spreads by wire and train and whisper across oceans and mountains. The Empress is dead. Bells toll in India. Black armbands are worn in Cape Town. Candles are lit in Canada. In London, the streets are quiet. Unusually so, as if even the cobblestones know. Your funeral is monumental and intimate at once. You'd planned it meticulously. White dress, white veil, white gloves. No black this time. You requested a military escort, not a widow's procession. You ride, for the last time, with your medals pinned to your chest. With Albert's dressing gown folded beside you, people weep, not with hysteria, but with something deeper, generational. You were always just there, and now you're not. Bertie finally becomes King Edward VII. He's rounder now, grayer, but he tries. He really does. He walks in your shadow for the first time without you ahead of him. Your empire mourns, but it also begins to shift, unravel. The cracks widen, and you remain. A name carved into marble, a face etched onto coins, a street name in every city you once ruled, a grandmother in 1,000 family trees. The 20th century roars to life without you, faster, bloodier, louder. World wars, revolutions, nuclear bombs, space travel, all things you never see. But your fingerprints are there, in the alliances your children made, in the systems your empire built, in the contradictions you never quite resolved. Historians still argue about you. Were you a great monarch, a relic, a reformer, or a reactionary? A sentimental widow clinging to memories, or a steel-willed empress who outlasted the century? There's no easy answer, because you were all of it. The girl in the nightgown, the young bride proposing to her husband, the mother of 9, the grandmother of Europe, the woman who wore grief like armor and ruled an empire while breaking quietly inside. You lived long, you reigned longer, and you made history fall in love with your shadow time skips forward. It's been days, weeks, maybe, since your funeral. The black crepe banners are coming down, the mourning gloves are being folded away, and Bertie, now Edward VII, is finally getting used to being called Your Majesty without flinching. But you linger, in portraits, in postage stamps, in the slightly awkward silences when someone refers to Her Majesty and then catches themselves, because there is a vacuum now, not just in Buckingham Palace, but in the shape of public imagination. You were Queen Victoria, and now you are a memory. Still, your legacy remains tangible, and nowhere is that more visible than in the machinery of empire. Steam trains thunder through the colonies. Telegraph wires stretch like spider silk from London to Delhi to Melbourne. The British Empire, at its height, when you passed, rules over a quarter of the world's population. Think about that. 1 in 4 people on Earth, connected by a crown, by force, by bureaucracy, by trade, by stubborn red lines drawn on maps by men in dusty rooms. You helped create that, or at least you were its face. And while you didn't directly manage colonies, you weren't sending orders on military invasions or managing tea taxes, you shaped the tone, the ideology. You endorsed the belief that British civilization was the best civilization, and that it had a moral duty to spread itself. That belief justified a lot. Railways, schools, hospitals, yes, but also forced labor, cultural erasure, famines worsened by policy, whole languages shoved into extinction. Abdul tried to explain that once, in a quiet moment. He said the empire wasn't just roads and flags, it was people and pain. You listened. You didn't always agree, but you listened. And even now, long after your last breath, the wheels you helped set in motion are still turning. Let's zoom in on one of those wheels, the Great Exhibition of 1851. Remember that? Albert's glittering glass palace, full of steam engines and stuffed elephants and awkwardly displayed indigenous artifacts labeled in poor Latin. That wasn't just a World's Fair. It was a message. Look what we can collect. Look what we can conquer. Look how orderly and clever we are. And the world took note. France launched its own expositions. America followed suit. Japan retooled its industry to keep up. Colonies began to both mimic and resist the model you helped shape. Historians still argue whether the exhibition was a marvel of progress or a gilded cage of arrogance. Probably both. You saw those contradictions everywhere in your later years. You adored India, the idea of it anyway. The silks, the spices, the poetry, the mangoes. You became Empress of it in 1876. But you never visited. You ruled it from afar, through layers of governors and generals and assumptions. And yet, in private, you learned Urdu. You read translations of the Quran. You made Abdul Karim your confidant, not as a political act, but a personal one. To the British public, that was more scandalous than any war. And perhaps it was, because it wasn't about empire or diplomacy. It was about you, the monarch, admitting that you could still learn, that somewhere in your 8th decade, you could be surprised. Let's pivot for a moment to the world of invention, because, wow, did you live through a lot of it? When you were born, people traveled by carriage and sent messages by horseback. By the time you died, the London Underground was ferrying passengers through dark tunnels, and Marconi was whispering messages across the sea without wires. You saw photography born and learned not to blink during exposure. You saw electric light replace candlelight, not all at once, but in creeping corners. A gas lamp here, a glowing sconce there. You sat for some of the first moving pictures. You hated it. Said it made your chin look like a purse. Still, you allowed it. Because part of being queen, you understood, was becoming image. And what an image. There you are, seated, stiff-backed, draped in black, medals pinned in neat rows, face like a thundercloud that learned manners. You became an icon of duty, of permanence, the opposite of flash. That's why the world clung to you. You represented continuity in a century of chaos. But you didn't love all the changes. You distrusted socialism, resented anarchists, despised suffragettes, especially when they broke windows. You thought democracy was tolerable, but barely. You often described Parliament as a necessary nuisance. Still, you adapted. Slowly, stubbornly. But you adapted. Because that's what you always did. You weren't a revolutionary. You weren't trying to remake the world, but you endured while the world remade itself around you, and in doing so, you became something rare, a living fossil that kept breathing, a museum piece with a pulse, a black lace ghost that signed documents and reigned longer than most nations lasted. They built statues of you everywhere, in London, in Singapore, in Nairobi, in Toronto, in Mumbai, in Sydney, sometimes in parks, sometimes in front of government buildings, always looking slightly stern, always in bronze. You would have hated how many pigeons now sit on your head, but you'd have loved the permanence. Because while kings come and go, while empires rise and topple, there's still a quiet dignity to your name, even now, even after everything. And somewhere on a bookshelf in a country you never visited, there's a faded school book that reads, Queen Victoria reigned longer than any monarch before her. And for a long time, that was true. Now let's tilt the lens, not toward empire or progress, but toward something you never quite made peace with, power in a skirt. Because here's the great paradox of you, Queen Victoria, the most powerful woman in the world who could barely tolerate the idea of women wanting power. You ruled for over 63 years. Your ministers bowed, your generals waited for your word, your signature made or broke laws. And yet, every time a woman outside the palace stood up and demanded a vote or an education or her own bank account, you bristled. You called the women's rights movement mad, wicked folly, wrote angry letters about dangerous lunatics who thought women could be more than wives and mothers. Your diaries are full of dismay at women in politics. You once wrote that God created men and women different, for a reason, which makes for a pretty awkward legacy, because whether you liked it or not, your very existence upended the narrative. There you were, sovereign, decision-maker, patron, landowner, queen, not by accident or loophole, but by right. And while you insisted that your case was special, other women disagreed. They saw your silhouette on the coin and thought, well, if she can rule, maybe I can vote. The contradiction is thick enough to chew. Historians still argue, were you the unwitting mother of modern feminism, or just a royal speed bump on the road to progress? The suffragettes didn't wait for clarity. By the late 1800s, they were organizing, protesting, chaining themselves to railings, smashing windows, and in at least one case, slapping a police officer with a dead fish. You disapproved of all of it, but change doesn't need your blessing to arrive. Outside the palace gates, women were becoming doctors, professors, journalists, clerks. Some wore bloomers, others smoked. A few even rode bicycles, gasp in public. You found it distasteful, unladylike. You wanted order, not upheaval, and yet you also paid your own bills, supervised your staff, ran a household the size of a small city, and advised world leaders. It's a little like someone baking a cake while yelling that cakes are a terrible idea. You never reconciled those pieces of yourself. Maybe that's okay, because the truth is, your reign was full of contradictions. You loved Albert deeply, but didn't let him propose. You believed in duty, but often ducked public appearances. You defended monarchy, but often disdained the nobles around you. You claimed to be humble, but had entire trains built just for your convenience, including a private toilet, which was considered shocking. And the country loved you for it. Your complexity made you human. Your flaws made you memorable. Your opinions, sometimes outdated, sometimes insightful, sometimes just hilariously cranky, gave people something to argue about long after your passing. Like that time, you publicly objected to anesthesia during childbirth, only to try it yourself later. Or when you declared that Irish famine relief wasn't your responsibility, but still donated money. Or when you denounced all revolutionary ideas but couldn't resist reading about them in secret. You contained multitudes, even when you denied their existence. Let's go back to your family for a moment, because while your reign shaped a century, your children shaped the next war. You married your kids off like chess pieces, each match a carefully planned alliance. Britain to Germany, Germany to Russia, Russia back to Britain. You imagined peace through kinship, and for a while it almost worked. But blood isn't diplomacy, and thrones don't share well. Your grandson Wilhelm, now Kaiser of Germany, adored you, feared you too. He visited often, tried to impress you, even mimicked your handwriting in letters, but you saw the warning signs, the pride, the need for control, the eerie charm of someone who mistakes attention for affection. Then there's Nicholas VI, Tsar of Russia, married to your granddaughter. Gentle, earnest, utterly unprepared. You liked him, but you also worried he'd be crushed by the world he was meant to command. And Bertie, now Edward VII, he's finally king. Finally got the job he waited for through 7 decades of being scolded. He hosts diplomats, wears sashes, opens things with golden scissors. But he's also planting the seeds of more miscommunication, particularly with Germany. The alliances harden, the egos bristle, the letters grow colder. You can't stop it. By the time you died in 1901, the chain reaction was already underway. 13 years later, World War I would ignite, and your grandchildren would be on opposite sides, shelling each other's soldiers while mourning your memory in rival languages. You didn't live to see it, but maybe, just maybe, you suspected. In your final months, your letters grew heavier, not in tone, but in paper. Thick, embossed stationery, as if you were trying to weigh them down, to anchor something in place. Legacy, maybe, or just history, trying not to blow away. You sit at the center of a family tree so massive it creaks. Branches twist across continents. Leaves rustle in German, Russian, Danish, Greek, Spanish. The ink on royal marriage contracts is barely dry before new babies are born. Tiny heirs swaddled in layers of lace and future expectation. You aren't just Queen Victoria anymore. You are Grandmama of Europe. The title starts as a joke, a nickname whispered by foreign diplomats who keep running into your grandchildren at every royal court. But soon it's fact. You've birthed a dynasty that wraps itself around the continent like ivy. In total, 42 grandchildren, each with a title, each with a throne, or close enough to one to cause trouble. You didn't intend to play matchmaker-in-chief. But once the children started reaching marriageable age, it made sense. Why not bind nations with blood? Why not prevent war with wedding cake? You imagined a Europe woven together by your own lineage, a family photo album so politically potent it might keep the peace. It didn't, but we'll get to that. First, let's look at your matches. Your eldest, Victoria, named after you, naturally, marries Frederick, Crown Prince of Prussia. You're thrilled. A perfect union, intellect, reform, Teutonic nobility. But when she becomes German Empress, things sour. Court politics, language barriers, and conservative advisors smother her ideals. You argue by letter, often, heatedly. Their son, Wilhelm. Yep, that Wilhelm, the future Kaiser, your grandson. You love him, kind of. He's charming when he wants to be, but also moody, domineering, and forever craving approval. He kisses your hand and threatens your ministers in the same breath. It's exhausting. Then there's Bertie's brood. You arrange his daughter Maud's marriage to the future king of Norway. His son George marries Mary of Teck and becomes your eventual heir's heir. George is quiet, dependable. You like him? Your daughter Alice marries Louis of Hesse. It seems fine, until tragedy hits. Their son Friedrich dies young from hemophilia, a condition you unknowingly pass down. That fragile blood runs through several royal lines now, turning private illness into public fear. Historians still argue how much guilt you carried for spreading the disease. You didn't understand genetics. No one really did. But once doctors began whispering, once you saw the bruises on little boys who didn't heal, you knew, and it haunted you. Hemophilia would follow your family across generations, to Spain, to Russia. It would haunt your great-grandson, the Tsarevich Alexei, whose illness would help destabilize the Russian Empire. But we're getting ahead. Let's not forget your daughter Louise. Beautiful, artistic, scandalously independent. She refuses to marry a foreign royal. Instead, she weds the Marquis of Lorne, a Scottish noble. The court clutches pearls. You nod approval. Secretly, you admire her fire. Publicly, you lecture her about table manners. Arthur, your soldier son, marries a Prussian princess. Alfred, your naval enthusiast, becomes Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, your late husband's title. Beatrice, your baby, stays closest. Her marriage to Prince Henry of Battenberg happens only after you approve every detail. She remains by your side, even after widowhood. Your matchmaking reaches its peak with Alexandra, your granddaughter who marries Nicholas II, Tsar of Russia, the Romanovs, a fabled, cursed dynasty. You worry for her. The Russian court is cold, rigid, alien, but she insists. Love, she says. So you give her a parting gift, advice, a brooch, and as it turns out, a bloodline marked by tragedy. Because here's the heartbreaking part. You built a family to unite Europe, but your heirs would take that web and turn it into a powder keg. When World War I explodes in 1914, your grandsons are the central players. Wilhelm in Germany, George in Britain, Nicholas in Russia, cousins by birth, enemies by politics, bred to rule, trained to distrust, dressed in identical uniforms and irreconcilable ambitions. You never see that war. You're buried by then. But you probably suspected the web was fraying. The letters changed. The smiles at family gatherings grew stiff. Your grandchildren bowed just a little too quickly, visited just a little less often. And you? You kept writing. offering advice, sighing when they ignored it. The family was no longer just personal. It was geopolitical. Every teething baby might one day crown a kingdom or cause a scandal. You tracked their progress like a general follows troops. Births, marriages, deaths, exiles. You called them my people, even when they ruled in other languages. The press loved the story. The grandmother of Europe, keeping monarchies stable through sheer lace and willpower. But in private, it was lonelier than it looked. Your letters to them became your voice. Inked affection, disguised warnings. You never signed with just Victoria. It was always your affectionate grandmama, like a gentle tap on the shoulder across a continent. You hoped it would be enough. It wasn't, but it mattered, because while history remembers kings and generals, it often overlooks grandmothers, especially those who built kingdoms in cradles and treaties in lullabies. And you, Queen Victoria, built your own kind of empire, one baby photo at a time. Now picture this. You, deep in your 70s, wrapped in a shawl, seated in a drawing room filled with too many portraits and not quite enough oxygen, read letters by candlelight. But not just any letters. These are from Abdul Karim, your munshi, your Indian servant, as the newspapers like to say, always with that sour tone, as if servant was the full truth. But to you, he was a confidant, a curiosity, a soft voice when the court grew too loud with formality and cold calculation. He entered your life in 1887, presented to you during your golden jubilee as a token of Indian loyalty, someone to serve in the kitchens, pour drinks, look decorative. He did not stay in the background. Within months, he was reading Urdu with you, explaining Indian customs, teaching you about Islam, describing mango orchards and festival processions. You were enchanted, not just by the culture, but by him, his gentle confidence, his irreverent humor, his utter refusal to bow to the petty spite of courtiers. He called you Your Majesty in public, Begum in private. That one means lady. But somehow, when he said it, it felt more honest than any of your dozens of titles. You elevated him quickly, too quickly for some. You gave him land, honors, let him sign documents and live in a cottage on royal grounds. The court exploded in horror. Your children were furious, Bertie especially. He said it was improper, inappropriate, un-English. You didn't care. You'd lived through revolutions, assassinations, childbirth 9 times, and one disastrous family dinner where someone lit a soup tureen on fire. You weren't going to be bossed around about friendship. You defended Abdul, fired staff who disrespected him, refused to read slander, even had him accompany you on official visits. But it wasn't just scandal that made this relationship significant. It was what it revealed. For all your imperial authority, you knew how little you truly understood about the lives of your subjects. Abdul cracked that open, politely, gently, but firmly. He told you about British officers treating Indian nobles like furniture, about famine mismanagement, about taxes that crushed entire villages, and you listened, not always comfortably, not always with action, but you listened. Historians still debate how much Abdul Karim influenced your policies. Most agree it was minimal. But influence isn't always legislative. Sometimes it's emotional. You began to feel India as more than a jewel in your crown. It had taste, texture, scent, rhythm. You had a small handwritten book where he translated phrases for you. Sentences like, "It is my duty to serve your majesty faithfully." but also life and death are in God's hands. You wrote back in your own uneven Urdu script, underlining words you liked, phrases that made you pause. You kept his letters close, tucked into boxes, slipped between pages, sometimes under your pillow. And the scandal? Oh, it fermented like bad wine. After your death, Bertie had Abdul's rooms ransacked, letters burned, documents destroyed. He erased your friendship with the desperation of someone trying to scrub history clean with vinegar and smoke. But he missed a few. Some letters survived. Your journals mentioned him, fondly, protectively. And so Abdul Karim remained, a footnote, a controversy, and for those who care to read closer, a sign that even monarchs can have vulnerable, subversive friendships. Let's not pretend everything was perfect. There were blind spots, moments when you lapsed into the colonial mindset you claimed to soften. You still called India our possession, still used words like exotic and loyal, still believed to some extent in the superiority of British rule. But Abdul challenged that, and you let him. In a palace where every voice was filtered through layers of flattery and duty, his felt different, sincere, immediate, human. When illness began to shrink your days, Abdul stayed close. He brought you news, poetry, jokes. He massaged your aching hands. He reminded you that even an empress could be a student, and you, in turn, reminded him that even a servant could be a teacher. There's a photograph, one of the few that survived Bertie's fury, where you sit beside him in the garden at Windsor. You're in black, of course. He wears a turban. Your shoulders touch. You don't look regal. You look content. It's just a moment. But moments matter, because your reign was not just ceremonies and wars and parliaments. It was made up of these quiet connections, private lessons, forbidden friendships. You weren't always fair. You weren't always right. But you tried, even when everyone wished you wouldn't. The year is 1887, and your golden jubilee shimmers like a chandelier in fog. 50 years on the throne, half a century of rule, ritual, and the kind of fatigue that doesn't quite show in oil paintings. You never imagined you'd last this long. When you first wore the crown, your kingdom ran on horse-drawn carriages and letters sealed with wax. Now, as you roll through London in a gilded coach, telegraphs zip ahead of you, crowds cheer you from pavements they read about in newspapers you've never touched, and somewhere in a laboratory, a man is working on something called wireless radio. You don't entirely trust it, but you're the reason all this is happening today. You are the queen, the anchor, the icon, and now, finally, you're coming out of the shadows, because the decades since Albert's death have been marked by retreat, mourning, distance. Your black veil became symbolic. You weren't just in grief. You were grief, a living monument to loss. But the people wanted you back, and slowly, carefully, your ministers convinced you to re-emerge, not fully, not all the time, but just enough to remind your subjects that you still existed beyond the postage stamp. The Jubilee becomes the perfect moment, and what a spectacle it is. London swells with people. Bunting drapes buildings like patriotic ivy. Union Jacks flutter from every window. Street vendors sell commemorative mugs, fans, tea towels, and, inevitably, tiny dolls in black dresses with your face on them. Some flattering, most not. There are parades, so many parades. Soldiers march from every colony, Indian cavalry, Canadian Mounties, African Guards. its empire in motion. The sun never sets on it, and today it never stops marching either. You watch from your carriage, spine stiff, face unreadable. The crowds roar. Some cry, others just stare, unsure how to feel about seeing someone who's lived so long she barely looks human anymore. You wave, not with your arm, too much effort, but with your fingers, just a twitch of the wrist. Enough, and they go wild. But underneath the bunting, there's an ache. You miss Albert more than ever. You picture him beside you, hand at his waist, leaning in to whisper something wry about the pageantry. You see him in every flagpole and polished boot, every over-rehearsed drumline. He would have loved this. Disraeli, your once flattering prime minister, is gone now. Gladstone, too, your frenemy in Parliament. You've outlived almost every man who ever told you what to do. You think about that sometimes. It's a strange kind of loneliness, not just outliving people, but their expectations of you. And now, as your carriage inches past cheering crowds, you realize something. You've become a mirror. People project onto you what they need: stability, morality, endurance, patriotism, even nostalgia. You're no longer just a woman. You're a symbol, a heavy one. Inside the palace, the celebrations are endless. Banquets stretch for hours. Tables groan under the weight of venison, trifle, and a jelly molded in your image. You don't eat much. You mostly listen. Your children swarm the place, along with their children and their children, a tangle of tiaras and polite tension. Wilhelm is here, dramatic as ever. Nicholas and Alex, the future Tsar and Tsarina, whisper to each other in corners. Bertie keeps sneaking cigars. You pretend not to notice. And at the center of it all, you, still seated, still watching, still trying. You find the speeches overwhelming. Too many adjectives, too many metaphors about time and duty and the sea. When it's your turn to speak, you keep it brief, dignified, tidy. You thank them. You remember Albert. You say how proud you are of the empire, of your children, of the nation that has carried you this far. Then you sit down, and for just a moment, only a moment, you close your eyes. After the Jubilee, something shifts. The people see you differently now, not as a recluse, not as a widow, but as their queen again, older, slower, but present. They begin to write poems about you, paint you again, joke about you in newspapers with a little more warmth. They don't love everything you've done. They whisper about Abdul. They side-eye your conservatism, but they respect the weight of your presence. You've become timeless, even as time creeps behind you, clutching at your heels. And in the quieter weeks that follow, back at Osborne or Balmoral, you begin to reflect more deeply, not just on your reign, but on yourself. You wonder, if you weren't queen, who would you have been? A painter, maybe? Or a governess? Or just someone who got to be held without history watching? But you were queen, and no jubilee, no carriage, no cake sculpted in your image can ever undo that. By the late 1890s, the world is rushing forward like a locomotive with no brakes, and you, Queen Victoria, are sitting quietly in your favorite chair at Osborne House, watching it all blur past. You've stopped trying to keep up. Let them invent their newfangled contraptions. Let them scribble politics across every newspaper and shout speeches from soapboxes. You have your shawl, your letters, your garden view. You've earned your distance. Osborne is your sanctuary now, not Buckingham, with its cold grandeur and endless obligation, not Windsor, where formality weighs more than the furniture. Osborne, on the Isle of Wight, is gentler. You designed it with Albert. It smells of salt and roses. The walls echo with old laughter. The staff know when not to knock. This is where you spend your last years. The mornings are slow. You read reports with a magnifying glass, dictate letters. Occasionally, you receive dignitaries, some of whom weren't born when you were crowned. They call you Your Majesty with nervous reverence, unsure whether you're a person or a relic. You are both. In the afternoons, you nap. Sometimes with a dog on your lap. Sometimes with your hand still resting on an unfinished note. Beatrice reads to you. Abdul visits less now. Your health wanes and your circle shrinks. But when he does come, you smile, softly, as if remembering something only the two of you ever understood. The family still comes around like tides. Bertie visits, dutiful and fidgety, always eager to get back to London. He's waited so long to be king. It's become a lifestyle. George, his son, is growing into a quiet, dutiful man. He'll be steady, you think. Unremarkable, perhaps, but steady. Wilhelm writes from Germany, long, emotional letters full of flattery, veiled complaints, and the occasional picture of himself in yet another elaborate uniform. You sigh. Nicholas, the Tsar of Russia, also writes, but his notes are more anxious. The Russian Empire is cracking. Revolution whispers louder each year. You can feel it in his handwriting. And still, the empire holds, for now. You remain its figurehead. The post office still stamps your profile on every envelope. The school books still list your reign in bold letters. The colonies still report to Parliament, and Parliament still reports to you, technically. But your influence is more symbolic now. You no longer push back on ministers or debate trade policy. You sign. You approve. You trust others to handle what you once demanded to see yourself. And part of you is relieved. You're tired in a way no rest can fix. Your hands swell. Your ankles ache. Your heart sometimes skips like a record. You don't eat much. Tea tastes like memory. Your doctors come often. You do not ask questions, you know. And so you begin the process of quiet preparation. You organize your papers, sort your jewelry, finalize burial arrangements. You request to be buried with Albert's dressing gown and a lock of his hair. You want to wear white. Enough mourning. You've mourned longer than some reigns have lasted. One day, you ask Beatrice to read you a poem. Something light. She chooses Tennyson. You remember meeting him once, shy, wild-haired, terribly polite. His words were always heavier than his voice. As she reads, your eyelids flutter and your breath steadies. Not sleep, not yet. But the slope downward begins. Servants notice you walking less, sitting longer. Your pen goes untouched. The empire notices. Politicians speak of contingency plans. Bertie paces a little more at night. And then, as January 1901 creeps in on frost-tipped toes, you begin to fade. It's not dramatic, not sudden. You simply begin to forget the details that once consumed you. Trade balances, formalities, names. Instead, you remember other things. The way Albert used to hold your hand during carriage rides, the first time you saw Buckingham Palace, the softness of baby Beatrice's hair, the sound of fireworks during your Diamond Jubilee, the look on your mother's face when you first refused to obey, the hush in the room the morning you became queen. These memories layer like quilts, one atop another, comforting and heavy. You are no longer afraid. You've outlasted almost everything. You've become history while still breathing. And now, at last, you're letting go. The room darkens, not from candles, but from something deeper, slower. You don't resist it. Outside, the sea hums against the shore. Inside, the silence thickens. And you, Queen Victoria, Empress of India, Grandmother of Europe, are ready. You pass away on the evening of January 22nd, 1901. The room is quiet. You are surrounded by your children, your doctor, your servants, a few blinking lamps, and a stillness that even the wind outside seems to respect. Your hand, once firm enough to sign laws into power, now rests lightly on the quilt. One breath fades, then none. It is done. 63 years, 7 months, 2 days. The longest reign Britain has ever known. Until, many decades later, another queen would rival you. But no one's thinking about that now, because your death is not just an ending. It's a collapse of rhythm, a breaking of something so long present it had begun to feel eternal. The word goes out, slowly at first, through whispers, telegrams, horses, then faster, newspapers, bells, gun salutes. The queen is dead. The empress is gone. Victoria has left the building. Flags are lowered. Shops close. Women weep in the street, not with theatrical sorrow, but with the kind of quiet ache that attends the loss of something that was always just there. You were the backdrop of their lives. Now, suddenly, you are a headline. Your funeral, as you requested, is not black, but white. You lie in your coffin, wearing your wedding veil, holding a bouquet of flowers and a photograph of Albert. In one hand, a lock of his hair. In the other, a personal letter. Your body is dressed for reunion, not departure. They lift your coffin onto a gun carriage drawn by horses, except, no, the horses panic, refuse to move, stubborn like you once were at Kensington, locked in that golden cage of childhood. So the sailors step in. Royal Navy men unhitch the horses and pull the carriage themselves by hand through the streets of London. And just like that, your final journey becomes a symbol. Duty over tradition, flesh and effort over ceremony. A human act for a very human queen. Crowds gather, thousands line the streets. The chill in the air clings to coat buttons and collar tips. Your face, cast in every paper, carved into every statue, memorized by generations, is hidden beneath the white veil. And yet, in that silence, everyone sees you. The train carries your body from London to Windsor. The mourning party rides in subdued compartments, speaking in half-formed sentences. Bertie stares out the window. Beatrice clutches a handkerchief. Abdul has been dismissed, quietly, already erased. But your will was clear. Your requests were honored. You are buried beside Albert, side by side at last, in the royal mausoleum at Frogmore. And after the dust settles, the mourning ends, sort of. Life surges forward. The 20th century arrives loud and impatient, and it wastes no time. Within 13 years, your beloved empire is at war with itself. Grandsons fire on grandsons. Cousins in Germany, Russia, and Britain, your boys, send troops into trenches where letters no longer arrive and crowns no longer shield. The world breaks, but not your memory, because the century you shaped, the Victorian age, refuses to vanish. It lingers in architecture, literature, etiquette, steam, in photos of stone-faced children and spiraled staircases, in ghost stories told by lamplight, in clocks that still tick in drawing rooms you once walked through. You are gone, but not quite, because when people speak of empire, they mention your name. When they tell stories of queens who ruled long and ruled hard, they picture your silhouette. When they imagine what it means to endure, they think of you, weathered and sharp-eyed, swaddled in black, but still upright. Still there. And even now, when little girls wear paper crowns and pretend to rule kingdoms of stuffed animals and blanket forts, sometimes one of them says her name is Victoria, and somewhere, maybe, that makes you smile. And now, we breathe. We leave behind the velvet corridors and soot-dusted skies, the clatter of carriage wheels and the creak of polished thrones. We let the weight of 63 years drift off our shoulders, like that final veil laid gently over her face. You've traveled a long path tonight, from the cautious footsteps of a girl barely 18 to the final hush of a queen who reigned longer than most lifetimes. You've ruled, you've mourned, you've written letters by candlelight and clutched memories like rosary beads. You've felt the ache of absence, the pinch of responsibility, the stubbornness of duty that does not bend even when the body wants to. But you've also felt wonder at steam trains and telegrams, at mangoes and Urdu and gardens heavy with salt air, at love, deep and enduring, never quite forgotten. And now the world outside your window softens, the crowd disperses, the bells fall quiet, and history, which once roared like an engine, slows its pace just long enough to let you rest. Close your eyes now. Let the flicker of candlelight give way to sleep. Let the echoes fade into dreams. And if, by chance, you find yourself walking once more, perhaps it will be beside Albert, beneath the Scottish pines, the wind lifting your veil as the sea hums somewhere nearby. End of script. Sweet dreams.